Tonight, alarming new details from former FBI Director Anthony McCabe's new book, and we get reaction from Congressman Jim Himes, Connecticut Democrat who served on the Intel Committee. He'll join us tonight. Then the Attorney General of California joins us to talk about the lawsuit he filed against the government over Trump's emergency declaration. Also, a new development that could have huge implications on the Mueller probe and also connect some dots as he continues to build his case. Former federal prosecutor joins us to help sort it all out. Evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thanks for joining us this Tuesday. Once again, the president finds himself in a war of words with a former appointee. And once again, it's over Russia, the president's connections to Russia, his bizarre affinity for pro-Russian policies, and his actions to try, however he can, to prevent anybody from investigating or prosecuting those connections. And once again, it is former acting FBI Director Andrew McCabe at the center of the storm. Trump, he claims McCabe is jaded and anti-Trump. McCabe now says a key bipartisan group of lawmakers had no problem with investigating the president, and also saying that when confronted with intelligence about North Korea that clashed with what Trump had heard from Putin, Trump told his national security team, "I don't care. I believe Putin instead." Here to weigh in, Congressman Jim Himes. He a Democrat from Connecticut, and he sits on the Intelligence Committee. Representative, of all the stunning revelations, and there are many from both McCabe's book and his interviews since, what troubles you the most?
Well, there are a lot of very concerning things in McCabe's book, starting with his characterization of the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, who apparently was kind of not all there when he was the nation's chief law enforcement officer. But of course, secondarily would be the concern that they had at the Justice Department when the president fired Jim Comey. And apparently there were conversations about should the cabinet invoke the 25th Amendment. Of course, Donald Trump is arguing that that is a coup, but obviously people were concerned enough at the most senior levels of the Department of Justice that it at least became a topic of conversation. That is not a good place for the country to be.
Do you believe that national security is literally put at risk if, as McCabe reports, the president is taking Putin's word over our own intel, specifically relating to North Korea and their missile tests?
Yeah, of course. Look, the president's unwillingness to do anything other than go along with what Vladimir Putin would like, of course that puts the country at risk. Russia is dedicated to sowing chaos in Western democracies. We've seen that in the meddling in our election, the meddling in European elections. The president, rather than sort of going out of his way to be friendly with Vladimir Putin, needs to understand that Putin wants nothing good for the United States, and therefore he needs to speak with a much clearer voice about our willingness to confront and oppose the Russians abroad.
Then you have Attorney General Jeff Sessions also reportedly saying that he missed the good old days, his words now, when they only hired Irishmen at the FBI. They were drunk, he went on to say, but they could be trusted. This again, the head of the Justice Department.
Yeah, obviously some of the stories about Jeff Sessions and, him being sort of not on the ball with respect to national security matters. And yeah, look, I mean, Jeff Sessions comes from a very different era and a different geography. I don't know if the Attorney General said that, but obviously in this day and age, that kind of rhetoric has no place.
Let's come back to, for a moment, invoking the 25th Amendment. There was talk of even wearing a wire to record conversations with the president. Depending on perspective, some people are saying this was patriotic, if true. Others saying it was treasonous against a duly elected president of the United States. How do you feel?
Well, look, the reality is that there was a conversation about invoking the 25th Amendment. There was a conversation about wearing a wire in the Oval Office. None of those things happened. Now, Donald Trump will ask people to believe that, or more appropriately, he'll ask his base to believe that this is somehow an attempt to reverse an election. It's not. It's a reflection of a president who regularly puts this country at risk, either through his blind acceptance of what Vladimir Putin says and does, or through his, for example, attacks on his own intelligence community, on the Department of Justice, on the FBI. This is our national security apparatus, and when the president drags them through the mud, this country is less safe.
Now, as you may have gathered from my conversation with the congressman, there were a lot of names, a lot of moving parts to this story. So what I wanted to do is bring us back to how we got here. Here to lay out the background, let's bring in our senior political correspondent, Andrew Whitman.
And Rich, this stuff gets confusing for people at home, and even for you and I who cover this stuff every single day. There is so much to go through, and looking back, it's amazing how much all of this began to happen so early in Donald Trump's presidency. January 20th, 2017, Trump is inaugurated in Washington. The fights with the press, of course, begin that day. The fights with his own staffers took less than 2 weeks to begin. January 30th, 10 days later, Trump fires acting Attorney General Sally Yates. Now, officially, it was because she wouldn't defend the Muslim ban, so she was fired for insubordination. But Yates had been warning the White House about Michael Flynn and the National Security Advisor's meeting with Russians, his lies to the FBI about those meetings, and that Flynn could, therefore, be susceptible to blackmail because of those meetings and those lies. 2 weeks later, Flynn was fired for lying to administration members about those meetings. His firing came just hours after Yates's warnings were reported by the Washington Post. Flynn later pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI. Less than 3 months later, Trump fires FBI Director James Comey, and that same day, Trump meets with Andrew McCabe, Comey's number 2 at the FBI, names him acting FBI director. McCabe's reaction to the meeting? Well, the next day, May 10th, 2017, McCabe opens an obstruction of justice investigation of President Trump. Turns out May 10th was busy at the White House as well. That's the day Trump welcomed 2 Russian officials into the Oval Office, the Russian foreign minister and its ambassador to the U.S., in a meeting that was never disclosed to the American press by the White House until the Russian government reported it. Trump also revealed classified information about ISIS that exposed Israeli intel efforts in the process. But it's what he told Russians about Comey that is the big takeaway, telling them, quote, "I just fired the head of the FBI. He was crazy, a real nut job. I faced great pressure because of Russia. That's taken off," and added, "I'm not under investigation." The next day, May 12th, Trump sits for a one-on-one with NBC's Lester Holt. Comey, well, he all but confirms that he fired Comey because of Russia.
Regardless of recommendation, I was going to fire Comey, knowing there was no good time to do it. And in fact, when I decided to just do it, I said to myself, I said, you know, this Russia thing with Trump and Russia is a made-up story. It's an excuse by the Democrats for having lost an election that they should have won.
A major turning point. 5 days after that interview, Robert Mueller is named special counsel by Rod Rosenstein. The day after that, Rosenstein and McCabe meet with a group known as the Congressional Gang of 8. That's important because even if you think the investigations into the president are somehow partisan, that Gang of 8 meeting was the first time those investigations were brought before a bipartisan group. The Gang of 8 are the top 4 Republicans and Democrats in the House and the Senate, and in each chamber's intelligence committees. That way, key intelligence findings and investigations like this one can be processed and had oversight done behind closed doors and without politics impacting how they're received.
The purpose of the briefing was to let our congressional leadership know exactly what we'd been doing. Opening a case of this nature, not something that an FBI director, not something that an acting FBI director would do by yourself, right? This was a recommendation that came to me from my team. I reviewed it with our lawyers. I discussed it at length with the Deputy Attorney General, and I told Congress what we had done.
Did anyone object?
That's the important part here, Savannah. No one objected. Not on legal grounds, not on constitutional grounds, and not based on the facts.
And Rich, we've not heard anybody who participated in that meeting, which includes Mitch McConnell, which includes Paul Ryan, which includes Devin Nunes, who is the chairman of the House Judiciary or the House Intelligence Committee, who was seemingly in bed with the White House and was a member of the Trump transition team and carried a lot of water for Trump during the beginning portion of the administration. Nobody has claimed otherwise from that meeting.
The silence today deafening on that. The thing that struck me, and there's more developments, we'll get to it later on the show here, about how Trump once again tried to have somebody put in charge of yet another probe look into this, in this case the Cohen investigation. Again, we'll talk about that. It's amazing what we get used to. It's amazing what doesn't set your hair on fire because it's just fitting into this narrative. But I think the fact that no one today, and Andrew listed them in that Gang of 8, no one today says this is lies, made up stories, not true. Not at all. There was another report that came out of the book that they were talking about the 25th Amendment, about removing a president. Apparently, he says that there was 2 cabinet members that were on board with it. We're going to find out those names. It's going to come out.
At some point, yeah.
It'll be fascinating to see who among the president's own handpicked cabinet in the early days of his administration was thinking that he was already unfit for office.
I agree. I mean, it's shocking. It's absolutely shocking. You're right. The stuff that you can get used to is kind of unbelievable when you look back on it. The thing that struck me in all of this was the stuff with North Korea. You mentioned it and you talked about it a little bit with the congressman, but McCabe was on TV this morning and he got the question again about that information about ballistic missiles.
If I could just set the scene,
yeah, go ahead.
You're right. So every president has an intel briefing. And this president's notorious because he wants them to be extremely brief. He doesn't want to do any of the reading that goes with the briefings. It usually comes in advance, and either it can be done in literally 2 minutes, but there should be pictures so that they can help demonstrate and keep his attention on this for the moment. In the intel briefing, his own intelligence chiefs laid out here that apparently there had been already missile testing on the part of the North Koreans. Trump looks at them and says, no, it's not true. Shocked, they went back and said, no, Mr. President, this really happened. And he said, no, I say the reason it didn't happen is because Putin said it didn't happen. At that point, the people in the room reportedly, if you go on in the book, look at each other, they don't know where to go. A foreign adversary is telling our president that facts that occurred didn't occur, that our own people whose charge it is to protect national security are telling him otherwise. I've heard a lot of people today say, Andrew, that is a threat to national security. This isn't anymore some, Mr. Magoo routine or that he's myopic or whatever, or that he's looking out for personal interests. Now you're talking about national security here with an adversary talking about another adversary and him not taking our own intelligence word for it, but trusting an enemy. That's unbelievable.
It is, and when you hear how McCabe described it, and we have the clip, but I don't think we have time to play it, but it just, to hear that a president said point blank, I believe Putin, over my intelligence agencies, over my intelligence experts, the people who are coming to, and this is not a minor thing, this is there a missile that can reach the United States? No, I believe Putin. I mean, if you were in the intelligence agencies, why wouldn't you start an investigation?
And by the way, because that was item 28 today when we're talking about, that's what personally frightens me a little bit, regardless of who you voted for, as to what the threshold is anymore for what we find unacceptable. This is not Republican, this is not Democrat, this is not liberal, conservative, I don't care where you fall on the political spectrum. This is about national security. And if it's true, my God, what does it say that we are tolerating anymore?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and what will be the next issue where we hear something like this happen with no notes out of Helsinki or his meetings with Putin, the withdrawal, the snap withdrawal from Syria? I mean, there are too many hotspots over the world, and now we're starting something with Venezuela?
And imagine when the Mueller report finally does drop, and the claims of fake news, I'm sure they'll be attached to that. Okay, Andrew, thank you. When we come back, 16 states are now suing the government over the president's emergency declaration. California, they're leading the way. The Attorney General of that state will join RFL next.